Hi everyone, it's Lacey here with the Your Lyme Matters podcast, and I am joined by Sami Kirschbaum, and she's all the way from Scottsdale, Arizona in the United States. So hello Sami, welcome.
Hi Lacey, thank you for having me on Your Lyme Matters, and congratulations on your new podcast. I am honored to be here today.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And so first off, I'm going to let the listeners know we are going to be talking about some deep and heavy personal experiences. And so I'm going to issue an emotional trigger warning, as there will be discussion of mental health, including suicidal ideations. So if you have kids in the room, keep that in mind when you're listening to the podcast. But also know the importance of sharing these deep topics with the community, where many of them experience the things that we will be talking about. So I just want to issue that warning as well. With that being said, Sami, hello, how are you doing today? How are you doing physically today, all around with your potential symptoms of Lyme and co-infections that might be remaining?
Thank you for checking in with me on that. I actually recently had a radio frequency ablation on both sides of my neck. They were 2 different days, and I'm in the healing process of that right now. So I actually have a lot of neck pain today. And the back of my skull feels like a giant sunburn. So there's a lot of nerves that are kind of trying to heal, but we also just purposely burned the nerves off to try to stop the pain signals. So physically, I'm a little in pain here, but overall I'm excited to be here. Yesterday was my 28th birthday, and I'm just really proud of where I am right now, mentally, professionally, physically, and I'm excited.
Yeah, so a belated happy birthday, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about where you're at today. First off, so you are from Scottsdale, Arizona, and I was looking at the map because I'm trying to improve my United States geography a little bit here, so I know where you are on the map. And tell us a little bit about yourself. If dating back to before you started to get really sick, what kind of person was Sami then?
Such a good question. I actually was born in central Wisconsin. I'm from Stevens Point, Wausau area in Marathon County, and I think we're number 5 for Lyme disease infections on the state scales. Before becoming ill, I was always on stage singing, dancing. I love being in musicals. I was always very extroverted and outgoing. I like to play dress up. I either wanted to be a mental health therapist when I was older or a princess, and the princess one didn't pan out.
Yet.
Yet. It could happen.
So you're quite outgoing, had, I would say, a zest for life, and you enjoyed performing, as you say. Tell us a little bit about dating back to when some of these things with Lyme and co-infections started happening for you, symptom-wise, that made you think, hey, I might have Lyme and or co-infections.
I always was sick growing up. Someone catches a cold, someone catches the flu, and they're sick for a couple weeks. I'd be sick for like 2 months every time. Still, you can't miss school that often, so I still had to go. I always had a lot of naps in the health department, like in the health room at school. That was happening in elementary school, that was also happening in middle school, and also high school. But in 2012, this was right after, I think this was going into sophomore year of high school, and I came down with Epstein-Barr virus, and like many of us, that can trigger Lyme disease to come out if you already had it and weren't aware. And for me, I was on bed rest from EBV for 4 months. I had an enlarged spleen, which is normal with mono, but I also had an enlarged liver. And at that point, I lost a bunch of weight. I pretty much looked like a skeleton. I couldn't even put my hair in a ponytail. My arms were so weak, I couldn't bathe myself. And eventually the school year was starting, because this happened over the summer, over my birthday period. And going into fall, I was told, well, you're not allowed to join the volleyball team this year. And that was also a big passion of mine. And I was thinking, well, what am I going to do? All my friends are doing it. Why can't I? And they said, well, we can't let your spleen be hit. It could be very serious. I said, okay. And right after that, the fatigue never went away. And all the symptoms of Lyme disease started popping up year after year, mounting on top of each other. Just so you know, the first ones that appeared were knee throbbing, like joint pain in my knees. I started getting migraines, anxiety, and my hormones also got completely out of whack, and I gained about 65 pounds in 12 months.
Oh, okay. So you've got all these symptoms starting, and so what made you come to the point of, hey, maybe I should get Lyme disease testing? Was it all these symptoms, or was it somebody mentioned it to you?
So actually, I always intuitively knew something was up. Like, why am I always sick? Why is this happening to me? But I never really had money growing up to be going to the doctor all the time. And I went straight to college after high school. And even though I wasn't very healthy, I functioned through school. I did good. I was part of a sorority, doing fundraisers, VP of an organization, and I would just have to nap constantly. Well, fast forward, I get through school, my bachelor's program. I start grad school for my master's in social work, and I start working for Child Protection Services, which is a stressful job.
Oh,
And through
yes.
that, I only lasted there about a year, and I was in so much pain. Things just kept getting worse and worse and worse with my health. I had temporary blindness. I started collapsing. I was having memory issues. Using my hands hurt. And so larger breasts run in my family, and I decided to get a breast reduction. Well, I didn't know that I had underlying issues. After that invasive surgery in 2020 in March, then I went on to see all these doctors, and they kept telling me, nothing's wrong. And I was like, I have 54 symptoms. Something is wrong. And I wasn't healing
Right.
from the surgery. So I planned to go back to work, and that never happened. I traveled the world the next 3 years trying to treat Lyme disease.
Wow. Okay, so you've got, as you mentioned, over the years, more and more symptoms. You're not healing from a surgery, which I think is common when you've got these illnesses. Are you someone that remembers getting a tick bite, or are you one of the other ones like me who may or may not remember getting a tick bite?
I do not remember having a tick bite. I have family and friends that get bit every year in the area that I moved from. However, recently an old family member reconnected with me and told me that she believes that she pulled a tick off of me when I was 5 years old. So I might have been infected all the way back at that age, but it didn't show up until EBV when I was 16.
Okay, so perhaps activated with some other things going on, as you mentioned, BV, which is also common that we hear. There's sort of a perfect storm or mix where the symptoms, they come out and then they come out full throttle. So you've got all these symptoms, Sami, and then as you said, you've traveled the world. So where did you travel to first? And you say for Lyme disease treatment, Lyme and co-infection treatment specifically. So
Yeah.
and it sounds strange to say, like, where did Lyme disease take you traveling to? But where did it, first off?
Where did it take me? So I would like to just start with, I did test positive when they couldn't figure anything out. I asked for like a rheumatology referral. And they were like, we can't
Okay.
give you the rheumatology referral because you have nothing showing up on your blood work. And I was like, well, look for more things. I begged, and my Lyme test, I was lucky, it came back positive on the blood serum. For the ELISA and then the Western blot, I had only 4 bands come back positive. And at that time, they were saying that that wasn't CDC positive. So I got the whole ring around with the gaslighting with the medical professionals. I was very hopeless. And then at one point, I got my hope back. I joined the Heal Hive, which is a bee venom educational program. I turned my life around, lots of great healthy habits. However, throughout that process, I did not complete BVT. I ended up having the opportunity financially to go to this German treatment. And I had done a bunch of research, and both of them seemed so effective to me from who I've talked to, from the science. And so I decided, why not try this treatment in Germany? And I went to Klinic St Georg in Bad Aibling, which is in southern Bavaria. And I was inpatient for 5 weeks getting Lyme disease treatment.
Okay, so inpatient for 5 weeks. There's probably some people listening wondering, I've heard so much about this treatment center. Can you give us a miniature summary on what that 5 weeks of inpatient looks like if somebody's considering this in the future?
Yes, I will say it's very intense. I never thought that it would be easy, and it for sure wasn't. But while I was there, how I explained it to friends and family when I got home is it was just like I was working a full-time job. I had to get up in the morning, treatment might start at 8 a.m., and then it might go till 3 p.m. one day, and then it might go to 4:30 the next day. And some days I would not start treatment until maybe 9:30, and I'd be done at 2:30. So the treatments, there was over a dozen different treatments that I had there. The main one being whole body hyperthermia, which I had 2 times. It was 6 hours per procedure, so a total of 12 hours. And then on top of that, they do all these supporting therapies, of course, independent with what the patient needs for their unique needs. And I did ozone therapy, magnetic therapy, laser IV therapy, light therapy. We did those detox foot baths. Those are pretty popular.
Yes, yeah.
We did that.
They are,
and
yeah.
One thing I did like that they did over there that you would probably not see in the US for quite some time is that they actually offered Reiki sessions. You did have to pay extra to have that added on to your treatment, but they know how important it is that you are held in a safe place. They know how much you're going through, and they want to support your mental health while you're there.
That's so good to know. I did not know that they would consider Reiki there as part of the healing modality. So that's awesome, actually. I see so many people posting, asking about this place and this type of treatment. So thank you for sharing that. And so you said it wasn't easy. It sounds like a full-time job, which a lot of this managing the chronic illness is.
Right.
And what is there any kind of Kirschbaum reactions to the treatments or anything like that when you were there?
Yeah, one of the biggest things I noticed that was freaky, if I want to put it that way, was after the whole body hyperthermia, the first one and the second one, within the 3rd and 4th week, you do a plasma apheresis procedure. And that's also like a 4 to 6 hour procedure where they're clearing things out. And what they're hoping for is to clean out that dead bacteria that they just killed from the hyperthermia treatment.
So you were telling us about detox reactions, and you said that they do something called plasma apheresis. So essentially, when I hear that, I think of blood type cleaning or filtering of sorts to improve the quality. And so were there things that maybe they did that helped with those intense Kirschbaum reactions?
Yeah, I think the plasma apheresis definitely helped. And thank you for reminding me. One of the symptoms that I was seeing as like a Herx reaction was crazy eye floaters. I already had them before going to Germany, but after the whole body hyperthermia, it would happen very intensely for like a half an hour at a time. And I remember just laying on the bed thinking, whoa, this is so weird, but something's moving, something's happening, and I'm gonna trust the process.
Interesting. And I always love when people share those little symptoms too, because everybody's symptoms for a Herx are so incredibly different. And so it can be literally anything. So for me, mine was intense agitation, like mental, just feeling like I'm gonna jump out of my body type of thing, along with physical things. But I hear other people's is completely different than that as well. But once you're so you've gone through the treatment there, when did you notice a bit more healing? Was it right there during the 5 weeks, or was it after you'd gone back home from Germany?
Yeah, honestly, I started feeling the benefits while I was already there. Of course, after the hyperthermia sessions, I was extremely sick for about 3 days at a time after each session. So I would have like my procedure on Friday and recover over the weekend. But to be honest, I was so optimistic while I was there. I was so thankful to be there. And I had a positive energy, and also I had physical energy from some of the treatments. I was getting more energy than I'm used to having, and I found myself really upbeat, although there was some days, like you had mentioned, that I wanted to jump out of my skin, and I had some more emotional down days because I was so sick of all the IVs bursting my veins. It was painful. I never wanted to go home during the process, but I just wanted the IVs to stop, to be honest. That was one of the hardest. However,
Right.
What I'd like to say regarding how I felt afterwards was when I went there, I had 54 symptoms. When I returned home within a couple weeks, I had 8 symptoms, and I was going to come home right away after treatment. However, I actually ended up staying a little longer, and I traveled a little bit. I actually had the energy. I didn't overdo it, but I felt good, and I felt really hopeful that this was a new turn for my life.
Oh, okay. So you used it to your advantage. Already being there, might as well have some energy. It's really awesome to hear that you went from 54 down to 8 symptoms. So you did some traveling. Did you continue any sort of maintenance treatments after you did leave there and come back home?
Yeah, to be clear, the biggest thing I was concerned about before going was there's all these debates about, can you do Lyme healing or mold first, or should you do mold and Lyme? Or do you need to do the viruses as well? And how does that all play together? And I think as time has gone on, especially now, my treatment was in 2021, I hear that more people recommend that you should try to take care of the mycotoxins first. The clinic told me that it was fine if I did the mycotoxin focus after. So I did go to do the Lyme treatment first. And now that I'm back, since I've been back, I have been treating my mold illness still. I had a really hard time always with antifungals, with binding, but I'm actually doing much better now. I just took another urine kit with real-time laboratories. And I'm excited to get that back because for the first time, about 3 months ago, my levels on all the different species are going down with the different toxins inside my body.
Also something to celebrate. Yeah, those of us in the community know that is something to celebrate for sure. I get happiness when I hear other people say that because I'm just like, oh yeah, I know how big of a deal that type of thing is in my world also. So you're having some glimmers, big time glimmers here. Jump back a little bit. So when symptoms were kind of at your worst, would you say, was that a mix of physical and mental symptoms at the same time? Or was at your worst, would you say it was more just symptoms or mental health or brain, or a mix?
Mine was definitely both. The neurological aspects with the somatic pain, hormone imbalances, Lyme rage, if you want to call it that. I think the rage can also come from mold as well, though. Memory loss, and then the physical pain throughout the whole body with joints and nerves and stomach issues. Though I had the whole 9 yards, we like to say.
Yeah, the whole 9 yards. And so the neural and somatic, was there something that you found helpful in particular to help with manage some of those symptoms?
Yeah, originally I've been in mental health therapy since I was little. I come from a divorced family. There was a lot of trauma. I've always been intrigued with mental health therapy, and earlier, I stated I always wanted to be a mental health therapist. So I wanted to always keep doing my own work to improve myself because I know improving yourself is the best way you can help other people and show up for other people. So the mental health aspect, after the Lyme diagnosis, I started with a therapist who was doing EMDR. And I did that for a couple months with him. He ended up saying to me that he felt that the trauma, I was in such a traumatic, chaotic state with my nervous system that I shouldn't be focusing on trauma work at the moment. And I agree with him now that I know more about that because it really depends on the person. Sometimes you're ready to work on trauma, but if you're really sensitive, if you're struggling with suicidal ideation, if you're just needing hope to live, working on trauma is not a good idea. But doing nervous system work and still getting mental health professional support is still a very positive thing. There's just different modalities and ways you can work on those. So I ended up meeting with him still. Unfortunately, he actually passed away. That was hard on me.
Sorry to hear. Jeez.
And
I don't think you expect that when you're doing your own therapy to have your therapist. Yeah, condolences to that person and everybody that knows that person.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was definitely unexpected, and thankfully I've had all these coping skills for so long, so it was okay. But something I want to point out is how frustrating it was constantly meeting new therapists and me showing up as the client, but then having to be in the educator role about what Lyme disease is, what chronic Lyme disease is, what the heck is mold illness. I had to explain, why am I living in a camper and I can't live in my house because I had to get rid of everything because of mold. And I felt like I wasn't able to have a lot of growth because I was always just kind of educating and catching them up with what was going on versus someone who just understood and could hold that space for me.
Right. I hear what you're saying where, if you're teaching the person helping you, it's almost like you're missing out on sort of that feeling of being attended to, right? Or cared for. You're essentially still sort of having to do some of that for yourself, which is a little counterintuitive in your therapy sessions, for example. That's something that I like to highlight is that people with these ailments are kind of pushed into the role of educator, sometimes researcher, sometimes pharmacist, sometimes medical practitioner, all with substantial influence by these illnesses on their brain. So I always want to point that out because we have listeners that are not in the community sometimes as well. And so thank you for pointing that out. And it also sounds like something in your personal experience was the timing of a therapy called EMDR, which is typically what they use in trauma or deep-rooted subconscious thoughts to heal the root causes, put them in the proper spot of the brain that they go to and process them. Like other thoughts all experience, they all go to the next spot of the brain in their process. So I did also hear you say in there that you had to explain to people that you lived out of your camper. Is that accurate?
Yes. When I found out about Lyme, then a couple months later after all the research, found out about mold illness. And I just knew as soon as I realized that was a thing, I was like, oh man, I know that that's a thing. I just intuitively had a feeling, and I tested my home with the ERMI, came back really bad, also did air sampling, all the things, and I knew to take my health seriously, I had to get out of mold. And that was probably one of the hardest first experiences of the Lyme journey, because you get the diagnosis from someone at some point, and then you realize that so much has to change, your diet and your life, there's all this grief. And then to find out the place I live, the one place I'm supposed to feel safe, I'm supposed to be calm and loved, is making me ill. And all the stuff inside the home is contaminated. And I remember that process. I waited until after Christmas that year, it was in 2020, to read the test results because I knew it wasn't going to be good, and I said I just want one more holiday that's normal because this year's been hell. I also just wanted to say that regarding how we have to become in the educator role, like we were just talking about. It's one thing to do that with like a mental health practitioner, but you also are doing that with your family, and you're also doing that at the doctor's office. And when you explain to people, I just moved out of my house because of this, they're like, wow, really? And they're shocked, and it's like, that's not really the response you want. You just need someone to be there for you.
Yes, and I'll cut in for those listening. So we touch on this in previous podcasts. I've yet to meet someone not affected by mold in their healing journey. So people listening, if they catch one of the earlier episodes, are going to say, I hear mold, and then they're going to hear it in the next episode, and they're going to hear it in the next episode. And the reason being is because there's a list of things that are known to slow or sometimes prevent or complicate Lyme and co-infection healing, because it takes away part of your immune system's ability to do what it's meant to do with those bacteria and other viruses. Sami mentioned ERMI. Sami can clarify, there's a company called Envirobiomics that does HERTS-Me to ERMIs. Maybe Sami used a different company. We'll link that in the bio as well in the future. Also for people listening in on the difficulty that mold adds psychologically to people is a whole other ballgame. Sami mentioned in there a bit like that you're explaining not only to your practitioners, you're trying to explain this to your inner circle as well. And just know that people with these illnesses, their tolerance to molds is substantially lower. So even though you get a normal result for a healthy individual, that's what that number means. For people with our illnesses, our number varies. It's a spectrum of what you can tolerate in the low numbers. So there's certain tests that actually have a little explanation for people with compromised immune system, what they might be able to tolerate. Anything you want to add in there, Sami?
That was great, and you are correct. I used Envirobiomics as the company that I've used. I've used them for the past 4 years, and I really have learned through the process that there are limitations and there are a lot of pros as well to all these different types of mold testing. And I really view it as, instead of this one test is going to tell me what's going on in my house, if you're doing air sampling, if you're doing surface sampling, if you're doing swab sampling, all of it is a puzzle to the bigger picture. And I just wanted to point that out as well, because that has been a learning experience for me.
Yeah, I'm sure there's people listening going, I don't know what the heck to believe about this mold testing, because I remember being stuck in that phase for probably 2 or 3 years. And even it came back in the future years after that, the whole mold thing. So if you're feeling just absolutely overwhelmed and stressed by all that stuff, I think that we can just validate that for you, because even for me, it was just, that was enough stress to push someone over the edge, just the mold, right? That's 1/100th, 1/300th. I don't know if these are probably not good math terms here, of what the person is actually dealing with. so yeah, if you have someone struggling with mold is an illness, please just be understanding and supportive. The information that you're getting, it's going to be difficult. You may not like it because it might involve the space that the other people live in as well. So aside from the mold, Sami, here, so you said that your experience put you to live in a camper. Now walk us through how that came to be. Was your environment no longer safe? You've got to get out type of thing to move forward with your healing. Tell us a bit about that process from mold results to camp. Is it safe to call it a camper van, RV?
It was an RV. Yeah.
RV,
it was not a drivable one, but yeah, it was a camper. So when I got the test back, I kind of mentally prepared, but at the same time, how much can you mentally prepare for the trauma of that event? Knew I needed to get out of the home. I lived with my partner at the time and a couple other roommates, and I was like, okay, well, where am I gonna go? Because the more I'm learning about mold, it sounds like it's hard to find places for people like us with these immune compromised systems to find a safe living environment where the levels are actually low enough that they don't make us ill. And I just want to point out too that there is no mold-free home, because some people get, the hopes up that like we can find a mold-safe home, but it's truly impossible. But we can find a place that is healthier than what we're currently living in. And ended up, thankfully, I had a friend. I tested a couple family homes first, family homes and a couple friends' houses who said I could come stay with them. They all came back horrible on the ERMI test. And I just kept getting disappointed. I was spending so much money. And then I had one friend who was like, do you maybe want to come stay with me? And she was in a brand new apartment. And I was like, well, brand new apartments can also have mold, so let me test it. I tested her place. It was good to go. And I moved in there. I moved out of my home into her apartment on the coldest week in Wisconsin. It was negative 45. And I got rid of everything, to the point where I didn't even realize that on the day of moving, I no longer owned a winter coat. And it was the coldest week of the whole year. Yeah.
Wow.
So my first line of business, I went to Kohl's, and thankfully there was a discount because Christmas just happened. And I bought a winter coat. I had 2 pairs of shoes that I remediated, and I had 1 tub of clothes left over and my school stuff. And I got some new bedding. Thankfully, a couple of my peers from grad school, they all knew what I was going through this process. And I put a list together of things that would be really helpful basic needs for me to get on my feet. And they got me new bedding and everything. So I lived with her for a couple months, and then my ex-partner at the time was working hard on remediating the house, but it wasn't going to be done fast. So we ended up deciding on doing a camper. And so I lived in this camper for 2 whole years. I thought it was only going to be about 5 months total, but it ended up being a long process.
Wow. So does this camper have electrical in there for heating, or how does that work?
Yeah, we had used propane tanks. Propane tanks all winter, which is unfortunate when it runs out because it's so cold, and I'd be like, come help me change it. And then also AC during the summer, but it definitely was cold in there. It definitely was hot in there. It was never a consistent temperature at the floor. My walls were this thin. If it rained, it sounded like I was outside. It was a very different experience, but while I was there, I focused on my health. I focused on movement. I focused on my trauma work, also doing nervous system regulation, cranial sacral therapy, acupuncture, all these other supporting things. And then eventually I was able to move into my own apartment after those 2 years of living in the camper. And that was a very happy day.
Wow. So that's something, if I was doing a move like that, I'd reach out to like some people in my circle. I'd be like, just so you know, we have to have a celebration. And the celebration is this, because it is such a big deal. So you're moving from there to an apartment, which is a big deal. How are symptoms? Are most of them sort of resolved at this point?
At this point, I'm still working on mast cell activation syndrome, which is a lot better and finally getting more stabilized, I would say. And we hadn't started antifungals at that point yet, because that was our biggest goal, was managing all the other symptoms.
In terms of the idea of Lyme warriors, which your current practice, where does that play into the story?
Oh, good question. So at this point, I move into an apartment. I'm doing so much better mentally, better cognitively. I had a cognitive test before Germany and after Germany a year later, and it showed obvious improvements. So things are going well, but I know that I'm still not healthy enough to go back to a full-time job, and I can't be in mold. And where am I going to find a job that I don't have to be in a moldy environment, be around people with perfume, cologne, because now I also have all these chemical sensitivities. And I knew that I was living in Wisconsin in fear. I always wanted to move out, and we call it in like the mental health realm, we call it felt safety or psychological safety. Did I know I was in a safe home now with a roof over my head for the first time in a while? Yes. But I was scared. I was scared of the water damaged buildings. I couldn't go to friend's house. I couldn't go to family's house. I couldn't be in stores. And I also have all my loved ones contacting me all the time because there's ticks biting them and they're nervous, and I'm walking them through, and I'm just so nervous that I'm going to get bit again. And I'm also having all my physical therapists at this time who are trying to help me with my bilateral nerve problems in my arms. They're telling me that if I move to a drier climate, then my joint pain would be reduced. So I took it seriously, started looking at apartments in Arizona, and I moved out here. Pretty much fast forward to saying goodbye to friends and family and moving out here. I moved out here in September of 2023. And right away after I got everything established in the home, I was like, okay, well, we're starting antifungals. So that's going well so far. It still is. And like I said, we're seeing improvements with the mycotoxin levels. But I also knew I need to figure out my career path. And what is that going to be? And I've been, this whole time that I was unemployed from 2020, I still did continuing education. I still finished my master's degree in May of 2021, about 2 months before I went to the Lyme treatment in Germany. And I knew I wanted to still be a mental health therapist or in the mental health realm, but how could I do that and help the Lyme community, who obviously needs support? And that is where Lyme Warriors was born. I spent the next, since last September, I've been working very hard every month with a business mentor, figuring out what's my mission, what's my vision, what do I want to do, what makes me happy, and how will I be happy doing it in the way that works for me and my health and makes a difference.
You had a business mentor involved as well. Okay.
I did. I'm very thankful for him.
Yeah. And so those listening, Lyme Warriors is the name of Sami's business that she created. As she's already told you, she is a therapist and a master's of social work. And so would you call yourself in the United States, special term for you guys there? Or
So technically there's a psychotherapist, and then there's health consultants, health coaches, or what I call myself is I'm a certified brain spotting therapist.
Okay.
Just like we have massage therapists, we have cranial sacral therapists. I call myself a brain spotting therapist. Brain spotting is a trauma-based modality that is focused within the limbic system, where we have parts of our brain with the regulation that are involved with parts of regulation. I like to always use my little brain, so
yeah, bring it out the brain.
Bring out the brain. So right here we have the brain. If I turn my head this way, This is our forehead and our frontal cortex. And so, for example, when people go to talk therapy, a lot of reasons why we can't get out of trauma when we talk about trauma is because we're only focusing here. So we're talking with the therapist back and forth about our trauma, but it's not involving the limbic system, which is over here, and the brain stem. And this is where we get stuck in those like trauma responses, flight, fight, freeze responses. And one that I've learned more recently is what I have is the fawning response, which is actually the most insidious trauma response, involved with people-pleasing tendencies. I don't want to get too deep into that, but just to bring that up, I started training in brain spotting in 2021. Right when I got home from Germany, my cognitive function improved a lot. So I've been training in that. I've been providing brain spotting to other mental health therapists in different states for the past 3 years, getting my certification, learning, also receiving brain spotting myself the past 3 years, which has been super impactful for my own mental health throughout this whole process.
So, full disclosure, knew that you do brain spotting, so I did a little Google myself. And after I did the Google, I was like, I do need Sami to teach me a bit more about it, because brain spotting's not super out there around here yet. It's new. It's like almost a newer modality here. I've got the brain diagram there. That is awesome. When they come to you for brain spotting, like kind of use some examples. What is it? Is it that they tell you certain things and you process that thing that they write down, or how does that session kind of fold out?
So brain spotting is a way that we can have permanent change within the brain by processing things that weren't fully processed appropriately when, let's say, a traumatic event happened. When a traumatic event happens, our emotional brain is on and the logic slows down. That flight, fight, freeze response, we go into the brainstem, we have a very primal brain reaction. And brain spotting uses, I'm going to bring my little pointer out. This is what I use with my client.
Yes.
We use a pointer and we access through their visual field. So if you were my client, I think the easiest way sometimes is just to give a demo. So I'm just going to do a fake demo for like a minute or two if you're okay with that.
Go for it, yeah.
Okay, so let's say you come in and you're feeling super anxious because you have all these doctors not believing you and you're pissed. Let's say you're really mad because you just want people to believe you. And I might work with you on processing through that anger so that you can come to a place of acceptance of, you know what? Why am I spending all this energy forcing people to believe my illness? Like, I know it's real and I believe in me. I don't need the external validation. And so that's just one tiny example of something that someone might work on. So if we were starting a session, I would say, okay, Lacey, tell me about this anger. And then you might talk for a minute or two. And usually what happens is people have a somatic response. So brain spotting is also somatic processing while the limbic system brain is also processing. So then I would ask you, Lacey, where do you feel this anger inside you?
My upper chest.
Your upper chest. Okay.
Yeah.
And if you had to view it as a color or a texture, does anything come to mind?
Okay. So I'm thinking about some medical experience of my own with the gaslighting, like kind of bumpy, dark purple, almost black, I would say.
Okay. And then I would ask you, now we have the texture, you have the sensation, we located the memory or the emotion with the sensation in your physical body. And then I would ask you, how strong does that feel? 0 to 10 right now, with 10 being the strongest and 0 being, I don't really feel anything.
Okay. So right now, because of the example, I'd say it's probably about a 5 or 6, but in real time, it's like a 9 or 10.
Okay, great. So then I would bring up my pointer and I would find then an access spot, or what we call the brain spot, in your visual field. And we won't really do it because, we can't do that today. But if you were my client, I would start over here and I'd say, okay, Lacey, when you look to your left, do you feel that sensation in your chest? And how strong is that? And then I would move across. How does that feel over here? And sometimes I move my body. And then how does that feel over here? And it seems like it sounds so, well, what does that do? But It's amazing. When I was at my first brain spotting training, that's the demo that they first did for us when we started the training. And I picked a topic on a very vulnerable spot from the past. And I could tell that on the right side, I felt like I just wanted to cry. I started tearing up. When I looked at the front, I felt angry. And then when I looked to the left, I felt nothing. And brain spotting is focused on the motto of where you look affects how you feel. Once people start brain spotting, you start to notice when you talk with people, like your partner at home. You'll be talking with family members or your friends, and you'll notice they might start looking off places. People do brain spotting on themselves all the time, and they just don't know that there's actually like a name for it, and there's actually this process that's happening inside your brain. So through this whole thing, we can process these somatic sensations out. People will usually say, oh, my shoulders hurt so bad, and it might be like an 8 out of 10 when we start. By the end of the session, the goal is to have zero pain there, but they might just say, oh, it's at a 2, and it's much more tolerable now. And then they actually have this process for the next 72 hours subconsciously that they're processing from the session.
Okay, well, thank you so much for explaining that to me. I do feel like I have a better understanding. I will add in there, because not everybody is familiar with the word somatic. I would say involves the body, physical, some of the sensations. Is there anything you'd add to describe somatic?
I think that was great. Because a lot of people talk about somatic experiencing, and in my opinion, brain spotting is kind of a form of mindfulness processing, somatic experiencing, a tiny bit maybe of exposure therapy, and the biggest thing is the attunement of the relationship dynamic between the client and the therapist. The biggest reason people are unsatisfied with therapy sessions is they didn't have a bond, or the therapist said something that they remember the rest of their life. So working with someone that you truly trust and can hold the space for you appropriately is very imperative.
And good for people to know if they're looking for a brain spotting practitioner. So can it be done virtually completely, or is it best in person?
Yeah, so actually all of my brain spotting trainings that I've been at so far, I'm going to be going to an intensive later this fall in person, but everything else I've been doing the past 3 years has been virtual. And I also questioned that. I was like, is it really that impactful? And I've seen that EMDR and brain spotting is both as effective over virtual sessions.
I received, as the client or patient, EMDR virtually. As a result of my living locations, it no longer matched with the therapist that was free through our system for a certain number of sessions. So I received it virtually as well. And I would say I was able to still unpack some of those deeper subconscious traumatic experiences virtually as well. So I questioned it. There was a couple things that were a little harder for me virtual. In person, sometimes they'll give you vibration palettes. Not all practitioners do it, to stimulate the sides of the brain without you having to think and tap. So it was an adjustment for me to go from the paddles that vibrate to doing my own kind of tap side manually with my hands. But 100% I still processed a crap load of trauma, we'll say that way.
So it's impactful for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that support as well. Now, if we had to just, for people who are here saying, I'm a little confused, EMDR and brain spotting, what is the difference? Is there anything you'd like to add to that? Or I can add a little bit in there potentially as well, if you'd like to ponder, or would you like to jump right in?
Yeah, I can try to jump in. There's actually a new article that was just posted a couple weeks ago about this with the Cleveland Institute, I believe it's called. Brain spotting and EMDR are very similar. EMDR, like you said, they can use what we call them tappers for that bilateral stimulation. Or I've even seen during my counseling internship that my supervisor, she would tap like her fingers on the side of her client's knees if the client was comfortable with her being that close. With brain spotting, we use bilateral stimulation music, so bilateral music, and it goes in, we do like cheap earbuds, and it goes between the left and the right hemisphere of the brain, and we think that that helps the processing. However, for some people it's interesting because the music can be distracting, especially if you're like an artist or a musician. So personally, I've done both with music and without, and most of the time I do it without music. But EMDR tends to be more structured. EMDR has specific things that the therapist will say and a kind of an agenda of what they were going to go through. Of course, it depends on what the client brings to the table, but there's a laid out path. And They also have you recall, let's say you're working on a traumatic memory. They're going to have you recall that memory and kind of have you walk along with them through it as you reprocess it in the brain. With brain spotting, we actually don't need you to bring up, like I'm going to ask you about those somatic sensations and maybe a memory so that we can have the emotional response come up so that hopefully we have a body sensation that we can process on. But we don't have to walk through the whole traumatic event. What did you hear? What did you smell? What did you think? That could happen, but it doesn't have to be. Brain spotting tends to be more flowing, and the therapist always comes in with no agenda. We always assume that the client's brain knows exactly what it needs to do. It knows how to heal itself, and it just needs the space and the container, the safe container for that to be occurring.
Hey, well, thank you.
One thing I want to just add briefly too is that what I personally love about brain spotting, David Grand is actually the founder, and he used to be an EMDR therapist, but he found that people were healing quicker and more rapidly with brain spotting. So research is still coming out about that. I have some research on my website. But what I tell people, if they aren't in a place to work on trauma, we can do expansion brain spotting, which is like the solution to the problem. We can work on performance goals. We can build resilience in the mind. We can rewire negative cognitions that are holding them back or limiting self-beliefs. But we don't always just have to focus on trauma work. We can do more light things, more positive things too.
Yeah, and when I hear you saying that, and you can 100% disagree, so it sounds like EMDR is kind of a lot of past, deeper subconscious, whereas brain spotting can be used anything that recently just happened right before they, walked in there. It may not have to be necessarily a deep traumatic experience, but one that needs reprocessing. Is that accurate?
That is what I believe.
I just wanted to touch base on that. And you also pointed out something that might be helpful for our listeners. So we have a lot of listeners with heavy ADHD or ADHD-like symptoms. So I heard you say some people find certain things distracting, whether it be brain spotting or EMDR, and I was one of those people with ADHD. Before I got sick, those symptoms got 100-fold worse. So for me, that's why the paddles were easier in my hands, because for me, the moving of my hands, I'm thinking about the moving of my hands. And so it's hard for me to do that. So a lot of our listeners have trouble with that as well. So maybe if they're going to their therapist, they're choosing a therapist, how can they better bring that up to a therapist? Maybe they could even bring up to a therapist, I can't focus with this type of EMDR or this. Maybe we could try a different route, and for them to know that there are some different routes. What comes to mind for you, Sami, when you hear that?
Yeah, right away I'm like, ooh, how can I solve this problem? I'm like thinking, like the therapist would probably have no issue working with figuring out how they can be more effective with that bilateral stimulation without you focusing on it. And I want to point out too, when I was doing EMDR virtually, I also didn't like that either. I was tapping and I was confused too, but maybe that's because we have some similarities health-wise.
Yeah.
I feel like even just thinking about the earbuds that I use for brain spotting with clients, and we have the bilateral stimulation music, I wonder if they could just use that with EMDR as well. Why not do the music? Or even if you have bilateral sounds of tapping. I'm sure that might be something on YouTube that's already out there, but I don't know. But therapists love open communication. So never be hesitant or fearful to express your needs.
You're pointing out something for people coming out of heavy gaslighting environments and feeling heavy power differentials. So that's another thing you might look for in a therapist, is somebody that gives you the decision making as well, a more collaborative type of approach versus I do such and such treatment to you type of thing. And I hear a lot of that openness kind of in Sami's approach that she's explaining here, that you want to really choose your therapist to what works for you, because ultimately they're working with you and for you in some circumstances. So it's a team approach. And Sami, what approach do you take, if any, in your practice? How do you kind of help even that playing ground for people, or could you?
I love that you asked me that because I was hoping that I could add to this. I'm just going to give an example from last week with a client. We were on a spot, I think it was on the right side, maybe by my plant, and I can tell from her nonverbal cues that she's distracted. She wasn't totally focused, something had happened, and one of my goals is always to empower the client voice. So what do you need? What are we missing? How can I make this better? And I could tell that she was a little distracted, but I'm not gonna assume, but I'm gonna be curious. I'm gonna be curious and ask. So I said, what's happening for you right now? And she admitted, yeah, I've been distracted the past 2 minutes. I feel super anxious. And I said, okay, what would you like to do? And she said, well, I'm distracted in this room and I can't focus because the sound's going on. Can we move to another room? And I'm like, absolutely. And like clients, because of that power differential, clients don't want to often speak up because like they've had these experiences that they can't really do that, or maybe they shouldn't do that. And maybe even their relationship dynamic, their attachment style from childhood, they feel like they can't. So I always tell clients, like, if I'm going across your visual field, I want you to tell me when to stop. I want you to tell me, oh, right there, I feel really angry. Don't move the pointer. And maybe I'm gonna keep going, and then they're like, ooh, okay, right there is really happy. So through the process, it's really beautiful with my clients because the first couple sessions, they're more hesitant. They might be like, oh, you know, how does this work? And it's new. But then by the time a couple weeks go by, clients know that she wants me to tell her what's happening in my body, because the more communicative I am, the better I can heal, the better I can show up for myself, the better she can understand me. And there's little things too that I can do with clients if they get out of their emotional stress window, where let's say the emotions are really high and it's like 50 out of 10 and they want to take a break. I tell my clients every single session, you can tell me if you need to stop, you can tell me if you need a break, if you want me to put the pointer down, if like anything, whatever you need, I'm here for you. And it's going to be that collaborative dynamic.
For me, hearing that from you, it makes me think that, one, you're giving them practice expressing their needs, whereas with our illnesses, these things in many environments, medical, in inner circles, those kind of get foggy or shut down sometimes. So you're giving that person practice, even just by telling you where to stop. That's, as you said, evening out the power differential. So it sounds like Sami does her best to incorporate that into the sessions as well. That's great to hear. And Sami, quick question while we're talking about this. In terms of clients or patients that you'll see, is there a certain area where you take clients from, or is it all areas?
Such a good question. I am located in Arizona now, but I'm doing health consulting and wellness consulting. So, and as a brain spotting therapist, I am allowed to do that in this realm. So I can take clients globally. I have had one client in Canada so far, and right now most of my clients are on the East Coast actually, but I have a couple in Arizona, Florida, Indiana, Ohio, Wisconsin, but most of mine are in Virginia right now, currently.
Interesting. Okay, so yeah. For our Canadian listeners, because I am based out of Canada, so they could potentially consult you and become your therapy client, or brain spotting, or anything along those lines. So that's really good to know that there's another source for them to go to. You have a website as well. What's the best way for them to find you, to discuss if they're an appropriate fit to be accepted to your practice?
I think the best way is first to go to my website, because I have a lot on there. I did it all myself. I have my heart on the website. You can see that clearly, and it gives a clear idea on what are the services I provide, and the potential client that's looking at the website can really decide, is this something for me or not? Brain spotting is not something that can ever be forced on someone. Someone either they have to be wanting and willing to do the work. Like a therapist or a practitioner can never show up more than the client's willingness to do so. And I'm so sorry, I hear my little puppy.
Puppy sounds, so it's all good.
She's like, hi, Lacey. So my website is Lyme Warriors, www.lymewarriors.com. And I have my services on there. On the contact page, people can send me a direct message. It goes to my email, and then I'll be able to call them, email them back. And I do free discovery calls up to 30 minutes to figure out, are they a good client for me? Am I a good fit for their unique needs? And are they willing to do the work as well? Do they want this? And are they going to be consistent with showing up with that?
Something that I'm curious about, Sami, is what got you through the worst of all of this with the Lyme and co-infections? Sort of jumping back a bit, like...
I feel it was many different things throughout the process. The biggest one was staying and remaining my own best friend. Giving myself grace, knowing that I was having these cognitive issues, but I wasn't going crazy, acknowledging there was a real issue going on inside my body, and no matter what the medical providers had said that didn't believe that it was very real, and that I know who I was before the illness. I know that there's a clear-brained, happy, positive, calm Sami that once was, and I know I could find her again, or even evolve into a better version of myself.
So becoming your own best friend, so would that involve some self-validation and self-compassion, all of that, would you say, or other things?
Absolutely. That on top of the mental health support that I received during this whole process and the coping skills that I already had, reminding to communicate my needs, even when I felt like that Lyme rage, for example. I had so many horrible mood swings, and I just knew that wasn't me. It was disappointing. I hated being angry at other people, and I had to process a lot of my own anger and just come to that acceptance of I don't need the external validation. I'm trying the best that I can right now and keeping that hope alive for the future.
Right, so being gentle on yourself also, it sounds like without adding that in, you added that in. So that's what got you through. If you could reflect back for us, when did you hit your all-time low? The depths of despair?
Absolutely. I remember the exact moment that it was the worst. I just want to preface it with saying that when I was begging for help from the general practitioner to do more tests on me, I was crying and crying and crying, and I was in grad school at the time, working full-time for CPS, and she said, "You're just depressed." And I was in the mental health field. I'm supposed to be the one who knows what clinical depression looks like. And I said, "I can see why you think that, but I know I'm not actually depressed right now. Like, clinically, I am not depressed. I have a lot of reasons to be. I have a lot of reasons I should be, could be, would be. But I'm actually not right now. I'm just begging for your help so we can figure this out." And I actually didn't have depression until after that kept happening. After the doctors kept not believing. After they kept blaming it on mental health. And it made me question my abilities, my career path. And the biggest thing, though, with that gentleness to self, I kept reminding myself, if I'm in a social work program that advocates for people with like social justice issues, marginalized communities, and I'm being gaslit, but I'm pretty boisterous as a soul. Like, I stand up for myself. I was thinking about all the people that maybe don't have the courage right now, don't have the ability, don't have the communication skills to stand up for themselves to their doctor. And that is what drove my passion. And one night, I had some suicidal ideation later on as the months went on, as I was in so much pain and no one would help me. And I was laying in the bathtub. I was doing all these Epsom salt baths because I thought they were helping me, but I was still living in mold at the time. So I literally was just bathing in a tub that had mold in the bathroom. And I regret that so much. Point is, one night while I was laying in there, I had no feeling of hope. I had no excitement about the future. I was like living in an alternate universe. No one believed me. My family doesn't understand what's going on. I have to move out of my house, and my mental health practitioners, it wasn't very helpful either. And I remember thinking like, all right, well, I just don't want to be here anymore. Like, I really don't want to be here. And I remember in that moment, that acceptance of like knowing that that was an option. Sometimes people with suicidal ideation, just knowing that it's an option, not that they'll ever act on it, But knowing that that was there, sometimes that brings people a sense of calm because they're like, oh, well, I guess maybe I should just enjoy today. And
Right.
while I was laying in there, I was thinking, this is bad. This isn't me. Why the heck am I having these terrifying, scaring feelings? And I was like, I just went through all this schooling, and what? I'm going to do nothing. I'm just going to be gone. I'm not going to be able to help anyone. There's no point. And I know I had an internship in London too, I did, like suicide prevention work. It was a suicide prevention campaign in London. And I know the impacts that suicide has on our loved ones. And a lot of times people keep going because of our loved ones or because of pets that we have. Sometimes if we can't fight for ourselves, we fight for other people, as sad as that sounds. I have all this experience and all this education with mental health, and if I don't feel okay, so be it, but maybe I can still work and help other people so that they can have a better life. Maybe that's my only purpose, and that's what pushed me that day to keep going.
Thank you for being open about that. I'm so sorry you also came to that point in this journey. To hear that myself as well, I came to a point of defeat. I didn't foresee a plan in the future to be able to, for myself to pay for the expenses. I felt horrific taking money from everybody around me. I didn't yet have the right team to tell me what was going on. And I hit that point as well where it was not that I didn't want to live, it's that I couldn't live in that state forever. That was not an existence that was okay for me indefinitely. It was a very poor quality of life, if you could even call it being alive. Like, I had a pulse. I didn't feel alive in any shape or form. I want to really just commend your ability to share that with us today, so thank you so much. And there's lots we can unpack here for the listeners because we don't hear this really common. It's like it's a stigma to talk about that. But what I really want to point out here is you have two people here talking with backgrounds in mental health. And those two people are saying we had the tools. We were doing the mental health work. In my case, I was doing everything offered systemically. I was doing the antidepressants. I even did antipsychotics in an emergency room because my thoughts just got so racy, out of control. It wasn't typical for me. I knew that my nervous system needed help, so I took some antipsychotics for temporary relief. But you have two people with mental health backgrounds saying this almost broke us. So I really want that to sink in for people listening, the people in the inner circles. If there's any healthcare providers that jump into this and listen to this, you have two people doing heavy duty mental health work on themselves, reflective people willing to take mental health help, sought it out. But we still came to the point where we had difficulty seeing a future living. So what does that say for people without the mental health help? I'm going to even just let this silence here. It's something else. So the bravery that it takes for Sami to open up about that is immense. I just want to thank Sami for that. For me in my career, I was heavily enmeshed in it. I knew all the tricks, all the therapies, I was doing them. But still, I just became so disconnected and numb from life. Like I was not even here. Sami, you can jump in anytime you want. So she mobilized that kind of hopeless energy and she used it to eventually get to where she's at now, sitting here talking to me as a mental health practitioner, a therapist. So that is amazing to me. And I can't remember exactly what I did. It was a really rough, traumatic time for me. But I got a grant from you guys, one of your people in the United States. That's the Lyme Treatment Foundation. So if you are in this battle and the financial struggles are there, that's what got me connected with my team that ultimately is helping me heal and keep me alive here today. And that's a functional medicine MD. I say M like moose because I have a appliance in my mouth, and sometimes you can't tell my M's like moose from my N's like what starts with the word N? Nonsense. So that's how ND. So my team, I have a great big team now, and for me, just getting access to the proper treatment was for me hope. I couldn't fight for myself, and people that know me know that before I got sick, they would describe me as a fighter. Not physically, I'm not there like, brawling, but they knew me as a fighter, and
Okay,
I couldn't do
Rocky.
that. That is the part of these stories that is just, yeah, it's so amazing the way people hold on, and to go back and say what helped you hold on. And Sami, for her, it was becoming that person for herself that she needed. And so the work to do that, for me, I had a dog that needed special care that not everybody could tend to unless they had some special training. And so I knew that I would get up and walk him regardless. Even if I walked a few steps and almost fell over, he didn't care. He's like, sweet, I'm walking. And so I would get up every day to walk him. So my dog attribute immensely the fact that he kept me alive. If I didn't have it, I cannot imagine the outcome. And if I didn't get that grant and the mobilization towards my team, I can't imagine how much worse I could have got, because I was already way worse. So that's where little bits I share with the people I'm interviewing that way, because we have similarities in some of these things. So Sami, going back to you, you decided for whatever reason you need to be here and you need to help other people. That's ultimately what is underneath your practice that people don't know about. Now, if they read your bio, they might, but that is just resiliency by definition without adding anything to it. That is resiliency. Now, do you attribute any of your resiliency to anything in your earlier years of life? Like
With childhood, I ended up deciding at one point, with watching my sisters grow up, I saw my parents really stressed out doing their own things, and I ended up becoming a perfectionist, which was not helpful for me in the long run, but motivated me to do my best, show up my best, and achieve any dream that I had. And so I would say I've been very resilient through this whole process, but even just one example that I love to share is that I smoked for 8 years, and I heavily had to consider and actively tried to quit 4 times. It took me 4 times until I was able to do it. And each time I did it, I realized what my downfall was. I realized what was the trigger, what was the thing that got me to start smoking again. And it's an addiction. And I think being so empowered by quitting smoking after all that time, which like less than 1% of people do, like within, I think, I don't know if it's 5 or 7 years, can't remember the statistic, but most people who quit go back. And I just remember thinking, I'm not gonna let that be me. Like, I'm not doing that. I want a better life for myself. Singing is so important to me. This is not healthy at all. And I was able to overcome that. And the coolest thing is I had quit like for the final time about 4 months before my Lyme diagnosis. So the fact that I went through all that shit with the Lyme diagnosis, moving out of my house, losing 99% of my belongings, a relationship ending, my brain feeling like you said, like you were rotting from the inside out. Like I was a functioning professional working full time. And then I couldn't even remember, did we already have this conversation today? It was just crazy. And I have a very strong willpower, but it's also just simply resilience, like you said.
the ability to bounce back, and the importance that resilience plays in healing from these illnesses. You have to somehow come back when you get smacked down. You're gonna get smacked down. Resilience is a really, it's hard to teach. You can't say to someone, hey, become resilient, right? Like, so I'd imagine in your practice somehow try to foster these miniature successes for people to sort of build the resilience for them.
Yeah. People really, Lacey, like people, what they really want the most is belonging. And there is so much through this journey that we have in this community where we don't feel we belong in lots of different realms. And so there is a lot of emotional pain in there. And that is where I do the building resilience with clients. You're gonna feel worthy again. You're gonna feel you belong again. You're gonna feel lovable. You're gonna be confident in yourself, and you're gonna have this energy that is innately yours that you've lost, but we're gonna get it back.
You summarize that nicely. All of those things are all things that I could say myself, they decreased or I lost them all. So it's process and patience and rebuilding. If you know somebody in the Lyme and co-infection community struggling with these things, some empathy. But I want to unpack one other thing that you said here, something that I experienced as well. Someone said to you, maybe it's just depression. And so when you said that, right away I was like, no way, someone said that to her too? How is that possible? Again, so you picture, right, there's these people studying, working mental health, and then we have these people that know us looking at us saying, hey, maybe that's just depression. So in my case, the person apologized to me and I accept that apology and move forward. I respect the person for apologizing to me for that. That's all that I can really ask. But let's just unpack that statement. Maybe it's just depression. Let's help those people without the words communicate to people in their circles. It's not a cakewalk depression, I can tell you that. What say you, Sami? I think I just used almost like Game of Thrones approach there, like, what say ye about yeah, go for it.
I love you. We have to hang out. You're funny.
Thanks. Thank you.
But in all seriousness, with the depression aspect, there's different, depression shows up in different ways. But some of the most common that people describe it, right? We're talking about emotional literacy. How can we help people communicate what they're going through when they don't have the right knowledge? It's not even knowledge. It's the right words to use for the experience they're experiencing. And it takes practice. It just does. And with depression, I would say it feels like to people like they're carrying around a giant shield that's super heavy, or there's a giant gray cloud over them that's raining all the time. It can look like talking slower. It can look like not even wanting to talk because you don't even have the energy, or you don't even have the care. Because why even, I feel so depressed, why even communicate? Why have this conversation? Why go there? Why do this? It looks like isolating. It looks like drinking. It looks like all different coping skills, whether they're healthy or negative, numbing out the pain. Some people do that, and then some people also will feel it. And one thing I like to do, I sometimes get depression episodes, and they'll last like a week or two max. I don't have severe long-term depression, but what I'd like to say is, from my studies, what I learned with depression is there's a cycle. So you start to feel this certain way, you stop doing certain things, you stop talking about certain things, and it's just this cycle of kind of a downward spiral. So the best way to combat that is by doing the opposite. Doing the thing that you don't want to do. And it's so hard. It is so hard because you literally, let's say I'm depressed on the couch. I don't want to go to the gym. I want to lay here, I want to cry, feel sorry for myself, and honestly, I'd probably rather be asleep, because if I'm asleep, I don't have to be with myself in this pain.
Right.
But go to the gym. Go for a 10-minute walk. Go listen to the music. If your friends want to hang out and you're depressed, hang out with your friend. But let them know, like, hey, are you okay if I show up as I am? Because I'm not going to fake happy. Faking happy is not on my agenda today. I want to just be who I am and show up as I am. And that's something also with empowering the client's voice, especially working with chronic illness. I tell my clients, it's okay if you show up in pain. It's okay if you're angry. It's okay if you were just crying 10 minutes before the session. Just come as you are. I never want people to act how they actually aren't and put on a mask, because the mask is exhausting and we need to stop normalizing the mask.
You said that very well. It is. As you were saying that, I was thinking of how hard it is to pretend that you're okay when you're not. That drains your energy. For people in the community, we have limited energy, if we have any energy at all. So keep in mind that if you're asking someone to come out and pretend, that they're not sick, they're not depressed, that's draining their energy. They're going to go home and recover. They're going to need to recover the next day. Going off what Sami's saying, depression loves you to be isolated. It loves it. It's like, how can it gain more depression? It's like, hey, just make them isolated from everything that could possibly support them. So for a lot of people, the intervention is doing the opposite. It's like, hey, depression wants me to go cry in my bed with the lights out. Maybe just to counteract that, maybe I'm going to step outside. There's a spectrum of depression, and for some, it could be mild. It can be certain situations. And then as Sami was saying, I'll use cyclone, that's kind of a spiral going down. It's all different degrees. Not one depressed person is the same as the next. So seeking a therapist, if you can, someone to properly help you put these words into your mouth, might be a starting point if you can get access to that somehow. If there's a sliding scale is the word sometimes therapists use if they do a lower price for somebody who doesn't have the funds. So that might be something that you look for if you don't have the funds. If not, then the regular price. But seeking out that professional to help you with that. But for those listening, depression, and I'm sure the person knows now that said it to me, they understand that it's not just depression. It's never just depression. Never. So I respect that person immensely because they did have to come back to me and say, I'm really sorry that I said that to you. I didn't understand. I'm going to try to do better. And for me, I had to accept that, and I was happy to. That's all I would have wanted in that situation. It was a really big moment for us. So for us here, we're trying to put some words. Sami used the word emotional literacy. We're trying to conceptualize for the people who lose the words to communicate, because that happens for so many of us. So we just added a whole bunch here. Feel free to use them if they fit for you. If they don't fit for you, toss them aside. We're just offering them, right? Depression can look all kinds of things. Seek out a professional to help you with that. Depression is one of the other, I keep using different numbers. I use hundreds, like sometimes I'll use 8,000. One of the other 800,000 things that these people are dealing with. So to put that into the perspective of it all as well. And Sami's been able to transform her practice, which suits better to her lifestyle, her own private practice, which I think some of us are forced to consider. So Sami, in terms of modifying your practice and choices for work, is there any other ways that these illnesses have forced you to take care of yourself differently?
Absolutely. Working with child protection services, I was in homes a lot, doing home visits. They're always high-stress situations, understandably, but I was testifying in court, I was doing home visits, and it's a high-stress job with police officers, a lot. And is that something I was going to be able to continue to do after trying all this time, all this money, all this effort to try to get healthy? Is it worth going back into these really high, stressful jobs when our nervous system maybe just got regulated, finally? And it wasn't worth it to me. So I would never go back to another high stress job like that. But in general, and I have also applied for disability in the past, that's still processing. We all know that's a long thing. We had to try to communicate that through documentation on what are those limitations because of my illnesses. So for example, multiple chemical sensitivity. I couldn't even barely find an apartment to live in because the apartments I was looking at when I moved to the Phoenix Valley, everyone has wall plugins sprayed in the gym, the lobby, the hallways. There are scents everywhere, and you know we got VOCs, and now I'm getting migraines and toxins in my body that I don't want, that I don't even have a say over. So now I have to live in a garden style apartment, so I have access directly outside versus like a mid-rise or a high-rise building. I wouldn't be able to be in a cubicle next to someone else who's wearing cologne or perfume. That would be toxic to me. I can't be in a water-damaged building. So I had to think about all of that through the process, and to be honest, I'm happy with where I was in the timing where thankfully I was able to get through my education kind of when I was getting to my worst spot. But I see people all the time who are healing and then they go back to schools. Everything is different for everyone, but I don't want to discourage anyone from finding out what that passion is inside you that you may not know yet. And I already knew I wanted to stay in the mental health field, so then I thought, okay, well, I can't work at these like counseling agencies because it will be 40 hours a week with clients that I don't even have a say over, and I'll have to deal with insurance. I might have to deal with the client's perfume. I gotta deal with the water damaged buildings. So working from home right now is the best thing for me. I get to work in a safe environment. I get to create my own schedule. I am doing the literal thing that makes me happy and that I'm passionate about. So for me right now, I feel very honored with the current situation. And at the time when I was suicidal in a bathtub or crying my eyes out in a camper, there to now is a complete change. And I was manifesting this, I was fighting for this, and that spark has been ignited, and it finally is blooming into flourishing now.
I'm going to ask you a random question. I've heard you mention crying. Now, using a percentage to classify healing, it's not for everybody because it can add stress. For one, a lot of us don't actually know where we are at healing because we're numb or we've not yet found the right practitioners. I choose to use it for my own purpose. I teeter between about symptom-wise about 75 to 80% of my pre-illness, like lack of symptoms that I had then. Now, I cry at this stage, like where I'm starting to embark. This podcast is one of my passions, and then I know where I'll go from there when it comes to getting back into the employed or making money phase of things. But this stage here, for me, it involved a heck of a lot of just crying and still processing, which surprised me. Did you find that or no? Or is that just me? I just cry very frequently now. I was not much of a crier before I got sick. It was like more just rare cases. But I guess maybe there'll be some people listening who might say, hey, I'm like Lacey, I cry all the time. And it's not quite as easy as I thought it would be for this stage quite yet for me. But what was it like for you, maybe reversing back?
Yeah, so after the Lyme treatment, but still dealing with the mold illness, there's still a lot of crying.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, like definitely normalize crying. And even in my sessions, like I could see it. I could see the nonverbal cues, and I tell them they're in the middle of limbic processing, and I'm like, okay, Lacey, let it out.
Okay.
Let it all out. This is your spot to cry. You've been holding all of this in. Now just let it out. I think that crying is therapeutic. I think that anger is a secondary emotion. Sadness is first. And so below the anger, and I'm sure you know this, is sadness. So when, for example, we have the toxic masculinity and men cannot cry, really, we're not letting them express the sadness. We all watched Inside Out. We all know that sadness is needed for connection sometimes. And I believe that there's research that came out that shows that cortisol is literally released through our tears.
I looked into that as well, and you're bang on. So it's an active homeostasis, aka bringing your body back into balance. So not only is there fragments of stress hormones in your tears, there's all kinds of other things that are literally found in tears that your body is wanting to get out. Thank you, Sami. Yes, it's a act. Your body is trying to recalibrate itself when it cries.
Cry it out. And I think for me, the biggest thing, like I don't have panic attacks much anymore. That all started with all of this experience since 2020. And I think that's why I focus too with clients about raising the client's voice regarding doctor appointments, because that is when my anxiety still to this day is the worst, because I do have complex PTSD, and being in the doctor's office, like even eye contact became hard for me through this process. I used to make great eye contact with everyone I talked to. And through this process of doctors looking at me and saying like, it's depression, or you wouldn't be sick with mold. If you were sick with mold, you'd be in the hospital right now. Mold illness is not a thing. Chronic Lyme disease is not a thing. All those things that they said it was so painful to have them look me in the eye and say that I actually started aborting eye contact. I was like, I'm not going to make eye contact. So I'm going to talk from a place of guarding, a place of protecting myself. And so even through my own brain spotting work, that's something I've been working on, is expressing my thoughts. And I think something beautiful that you said too was we have us too in the mental health field, and then we have people that are not knowledgeable on mental health field telling us that it's mental health. And so in the past me was extremely hurt and then questioned myself, when in reality, now that I have this confidence back, now that I have the knowledge of Lyme disease, the knowledge of mold illness, they were in the wrong. They should not have told you it was depression. You know more about depression than they do. That's just super wrong. I don't know what else word to use for that.
Yeah, but it's something many people in the community probably experience, right? So in terms of what we can offer people, just for some safety around that, I think we both agree that if it's within your means, if you can find a trusted mental health practitioner, That can be a psychotherapist. That can be a master's of social work. That can be in my country they call it registered clinical counselor. Some other disciplines can also do therapy if they're certified for it. Some medical doctors, they're able to do those safety assessments. Psychiatrists, nurse practitioners. If you have the means to seek that assessment for yourself, do that. Is there anything else that we can recommend to people? Now, we talked about suicidal ideations. In the States, is that assessed in an emergency department? I don't know how it works in the States. I know how it works in Canada. Where can people go maybe to get the proper safety assessment?
Yeah, it's tricky, Lacey, in the US. I don't know compared to Canada, but sometimes it's also difficult for people. Let's say, for example, it's a firefighter and he's struggling with suicidal ideation. If he were to, it's very unfortunate, but sometimes that's the way the system is right now. If he were to say, like, I'm struggling with suicidality and then got an in-hospitalization, they could lose their job. So there are some real barriers to people communicating the needs that they have too, because in certain lines of work, they could be deemed cognitively able or mentally able or accepted to work in that field. So that's one touchy area. But for example, there's like the crisis hotline, a suicide hotline, our national hotline. If you Google it, it will pop up right away. I also know if you Google anything about suicide, the national hotline pops up right away.
Okay.
And the tricky part is with emergency departments, if someone's actively about to hurt themselves, there's things like to hold people, but the truth is they need the mental health aspect, and the ED is not going to be great for that. They're just making sure you're okay in this moment, but you're going to need support elsewhere. And I highly recommend, if people are struggling with anxiety, panic attacks, PTSD, looking for emotional support for sure.
Right.
And one thing to add to what you said with all the different careers that people have, I personally think it's super important to find someone that actually has an education, because I know in the US, I don't know global wise quite yet, but a lot of people can say, I do this and I'm a certified coach and I do this. And there's a lot of certified coaches who are wonderful and they have an education, but there are some people who can label themselves these things, and do they really have a credential? Do they have a background? And why I think that's so important is because there's serious damage that someone could be doing to their clients if they are not actually educated, if they don't have the experience to help people going through these hard times.
Thank you for pointing that out. But Sami's saying coaches, for example, are very, very helpful for many things. But here in Canada, we do not ever send someone to a coach for a mental health assessment. For safety, there are people that do schooling, education, and credentials to be fit to assess and then be able to make the proper safety recommendations. So you want to look that up in your country. Sami's highlighted a bit for the United States, which I'm not familiar with. Sami, do you know if psychiatrists are a paid service that people can seek there as well in the States?
Personally, on my whole journey with all the different practitioners and different doctors I've seen, I've never been to a psychiatrist myself. I've had everything else under the sun, but not very knowledgeable about how that works. But I do know that if someone wanted to start to get an assessment, like, are you dealing with anxiety? Are you dealing with depression? Even a family practitioner, a general primary doctor, they have those things. So if you go in and you say, hey, I'm kind of curious, I might be depressed, but I don't know if it's just sadness. They can give you, it's called the MMDs for one of them, major depressive disorder. And then there's also the GAD, which is generalized anxiety disorder questionnaire. And these are questionnaires that a primary can give you. They can see the score, and then they will be hopefully very honest with, I am not a mental health practitioner, but it looks like from this, you are suffering potentially with this, and it would be recommended that you get some support.
That's super helpful. We're giving thoughts, sharing experience on 2 different countries here. And safety is the highest priority as well. If you're not certified and trained, please suggest they go to the proper health professionals that are certified and trained to assess suicidality. That's always, we want to send to the health professionals for that here in Canada. And it sounds like you want people to get connected with those professionals in the United States as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So So Sami, so is there anything that we've not talked about that you would like to mention or share with the Lyme and co-infection community? Sometimes I forget things in my interviews, so there's an opportunity there.
I just want to give a general message to not give up, to continue showing up, even if that's only 20% of you, or if that's 80% of you on one day. And a big thing for me that I learned through this experience with not knowing quite what family members to reach out to or what friends were going to be supportive, simplifying my life was the best thing that I did. I left a toxic relationship. I stopped hanging out with friends that caused me more stress than happiness. And I also stopped going and seeking the emotional support from people who were emotionally unavailable to give it to me.
That's
So
a big one, Sami. That is a big one.
yeah,
Very
no
big.
matter how bad maybe the relationship with your dad or your mom or your sister, you want them to love you so much and you just really want that emotional support. If they're not giving that and it's not surprising, that's just the relationship dynamic you have. Stop asking for, water to be flowing from a fountain that it's never flowed from. I have found, with what circumstances can I go to certain friends? Do I want advice? Well, then I go to this friend. Do I just want to cry and I just want you to sit there and just kind of maybe hold my hand or hug me? Call that friend. Or do you need a friend to challenge you and say, girl, get your shit together. You're stronger than this. I'm going to give you a great pep talk. You're going to leave feeling like a boss bitch. Like, find the people that you need in the moment, but learn to not keep going to the people that are not giving what you need.
If someone's not able, for whatever reasons, to them, not able to be there for you or support you, and if they're doing the opposite, they're making you feel worse, then try to shift some of that energy to the people that are able to potentially do that for you, because you have limited energy. So a very strategic use of it. And that analogy of the fountain running dry, I've never heard it, but it's awesome. So I just say that.
I've never said it. It just came up.
That's the best when quotes come out here on the podcast like that. It's like, where did that come from? I just said that I didn't. Sometimes I say things, and then after I say it, I'm like, oh shoot, I don't actually even really know what that specific word implies, and then I think, so yes, so
It's
yeah,
not the fountain of youth anymore. It's the fountain of emotional support.
exactly. You never know, I might use that at some point when I'm speaking to somebody. So with that being said, Sami, I would like to thank you very, very much for your openness, sharing with people, your vulnerability about your absolute worst time, because there's going to be a lot of people who connect with that. Thank you for even allowing me to open up more about my experience when that happened, and the work that you're doing to make Lyme warriors feel accepted, welcomed, validated, heard. That is immense. So I just want to thank you so much for that. And with that being said, that concludes our episode of the Your Lyme Matters podcast. So I will, let's see here.
Thank you, Lacey.
You're welcome. My pleasure.